Hello and thanks for joining me. My name is Adebayo Uluwake. In the previous podcast, we saw how the huge coalition of 141 Yoruba states and towns that formed an alliance with Ibadan forces could not capture Ijaiye, and how the two notable battles fought by them against General Kunrumi had been stalemated. We also saw how the adversaries went back to searching for allies, with Kunrumi getting the Ijebus to side with him and winning the loyalty of the Egbas, thereby boosting his military capability. As the fighting continued, both sides undertook military deployments to secure new territorial gains and to keep trade routes open. The Ijaies thus posted soldiers to Olokemeji to keep the communication lines between Abeokuta and Ijaiye open, while General Kunrumi sent troops to Irawo, a town in the Okeogun district, to protect those towns that formed the food basket of Ijaiye. The Ibadan military leadership, on their part, deployed a strong force to keep the roads to Ijebu-Remo and Ikpara open in order to ensure that access to the ports of Lagos and Porto-Novo were not interrupted. The Ibadan Allied Force, determined to end the war, sent General Alatoshisha to go and hold Iseyin, and thereafter to launch from there to capture Irawo, where Ijaiye had a formidable force. They also sent General Ogumola to go and attack Iwaun, another Ijaiye fortress. General Kunrumi got intelligence on their plans and therefore sent reinforcements to Iwaun under the command of some of his most experienced generals. They included Amodu, Oguntusi, Adelakun, and his own son, Arawole. The subsequent engagements between both parties at Iwaun was one of the bloodiest episodes of the Ijaiye War. General Ogumola, deploying from Iseyin, assaulted the town, which is set on a hill, and a fierce battle ensued. Ijaiye lost 3 generals, Amodu and Arawole, who were shot down from their horses, while Oguntusi sustained injuries, which later took his life. The distressing news got to the commander-in-chief, Are Kunrumi. He then took the decision to launch a now or never assault on the headquarters of the Oyo Imperial Army at Olorishaoku, as he had intelligence that all the key generals, including Ibikunle, were there. Kunrumi's assault was daring, comprehensive, and completely took the Allied forces by surprise. His forces overran the headquarters, forcing the enemy to beat a tactical retreat to River Oshe. Credit for the recovery of the Oyo Imperial Army was attributed to a new general, Ayejenku, whose exploits in the war catapulted him into the top echelon of the Allied forces. He it was who rallied to salvage the imperial force and regrouped the force in order to compel General Kunrumi and his own forces to pull back. While the Ijaiye War continued, some Egbado towns rebelled against Egba's authority, while forces from Dahomey launched probing attacks that sacked Ishaga and destroyed 5 tributary towns of Abeokuta. In fact, Iwe Irohin, the first newspaper to be published in what would later become the Federal Republic of Nigeria, had reported that the destruction of Ishaga resulted in a refugee influx into Abeokuta, and the renewed threats from Dahomey made it impossible for the Egbas to continue sending reinforcements to support the Ijayes in the ongoing war with Ibadan. Due to the food shortages that the siege on them instigated, Ijaye suffered great famine, and its people had to depend on the Egbas for food. A missionary, Mr. Mann, wrote to the British governor of the colony of Lagos, asking him to mediate and stop the war in order to end the famine. Thus, on Wednesday, March 12, 1862, Lieutenant Dolben of the ship HMS Prometheus and a European missionary by the name of Mr. Roper traveled on the governor's instruction first to rescue Mr. and Mrs. Mann and then escort them to Lagos, and while on that same mission, to seek to mediate in the Ijaiye War. They arrived Ijaiye on Saturday, 15th March 1862, and met with some Ijaiye generals, asking them to allow Lieutenant Dolben to mediate between them and the Ibadan generals. The Ijaiye generals totally rejected the offer and vowed to continue fighting. The great Are Ona Kakanfo of Yorubaland, General Kunrumi, succumbed to the cold hands of death in June 1861. He was neither wounded nor killed in battle, but he gave up the ghost in his capital city. Despite his transition, his generals continued fighting, refusing to surrender. The Iwe Irohin edition of January 25, 1862 reported on bold military incursions made by the allied Egba and Ijaiye troops on the positions of the Oyo Imperial Army from two axes, and their fight against them as it occurred before they were withdrawn to Oshe. Reinforced, they relaunched their attack and inflicted injury on many of the Ibadan troops and generals. Despite their best efforts, they could not capture the headquarters of the Oyo Imperial forces in order to break the siege. In the evening of Monday, 17th March 1862, exactly 9 months after the death of Are Kunrumi, an order was given for the Egba army to stand down and withdraw to Abeokuta. General Abogunrin also ordered the Ijaiye army under his command to stand down, give up defense of Ijaiye, and withdraw to Abeokuta. Ibadan forces thereafter entered Ijaiye and took civilians in the town prisoner, including Mr. Roper, the European missionary who had previously accompanied Lieutenant Dolben in an effort to persuade the Ijaiye High Command to agree to a mediation with Ibadan. Roper had been mistaken for a certain Mr. Pettiford, an African American that had fought on the side of the Ijaiye army and had been responsible for the deaths of so many Ibadan soldiers. Eventually, Reverend David Hinderer reportedly appealed to Alaafin Adelu, who sent a message to General Ogunmola, who then reluctantly released Mr. Roper. The Ijaiye War was brutal in its intensity, holistic in its destruction, and unforgiving in its negative impact on the psychosocial condition of affected populations. Kemi Morgan records that it was a disastrous war for the whole Yoruba country, with hundreds dead from famine and from ballistic injuries, and with many more kidnapped and sold into slavery. Trade within Yorubaland and with European merchants suffered greatly, bringing the economy of the Oyo Empire and its vassal states into ruin. In fact, relying on Kemi Morgan's account again, we note that Consul G. Brand had been compelled to write to Lord John Russell in England to explain the impact of the Ijaiye War on trade between the British and the interior of Yorubaland. The Ijaiye War began in March 1860 and ended in October 1862. It was fought for 2 years and 9 months, though it featured many bloody campaigns. Ultimately, it was decided by the battles fought at Ikpara, Ikperu, Ode, and Ikorodu for control of the trade route, the attack on Iwamu, and the invasion of Olorishaoko, the field headquarters of the allied Oyo Imperial Army. These battles were the watersheds of the Ijaiye War, and they undoubtedly determined its winner and its loser. The Oyo Empire had been struggling to find its rhythm after the Alaafin was forced to abandon the old capital at Oyo-Ile following the death of Alaafin Oluewu during the Eleduwe War. The transition from the old to the new capital at Igboho came with its own challenges. It is suggested that the power and authority which characterized the status of an Alaafin and the awe with which the foremost Yoruba ruler was beheld by his subjects and foreign states was more pronounced when he reigned at Oyo-Ile. It was as if the transition to the new capital demystified the Ikuba Bayeye. Those who hold strongly to tradition will insist that making Prince Atiba Alaafin rather than calling for nominations as was expected in accordance with Yoruba tradition, and then going on to agree to install his son Aremu Adelu as Alaafin to succeed his father, were back-to-back blunders that contributed to dividing the ruling houses, upturning well-ordered functioning of state institutions, and causing its military establishment to fracture. The civil wars, which resulted from the destruction of esprit de corps within what was left of the Oyo Imperial Army, not only led to the defeat of General Kunomi, the Are Ona Kakanfo, but also ensured the rapacious, intrinsic, and comprehensive defeat of the Oyo Empire itself. What do you think? Would you agree with such a conclusion? Please add your comments to the section below, including by providing any additional information that you feel might deepen an understanding of this topic, or even by providing any information you feel may have been omitted. With this, we have come to the end of this podcast series on Power and Diplomacy in 17th Century Yorubaland. I do hope you have enjoyed the entire 6 episodes, and I warmly invite you to join me in the next podcast as we examine another interesting aspect in the realm of power and diplomacy. I will surely catch up with you in the next podcast. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.